That's what I was thinking for you. I mean, I think we can change around, but I was like, she's ready. Yeah, it's not organized.
She likes to collect the grades. She's doing an MBA. I said she's doing so well. I know what that's great. To share on the challenge. He had this book of stories that was also like very multicultural. Like some Buddhist man in the village gets a horse, and everybody's like, "Oh, horse, come here! I'm so excited for you." Until he got right in his horse, and he gets thrown off and he breaks his leg. And they're like, "Oh, your leg, this is terrible! I'm so sorry." Well, war breaks out and all able-bodied men are sent to war, and you can't go to war. And everyone's like, "You don't have to go, they're so great, I'm so happy for you." You think so? And it kind of goes on. But I think about that a lot. You just don't always know.
They had a weekend in there. Oh my God. Yeah. I went away with the turkey for and then like take off from the training.
What do you do training?
I was so tired. I can always use my
with a major problem, I mentioned it. Somebody has made a choice.
Hey, Rick, can you hear me back there? Okay. Am I blowing anybody's eardrums out up here?
No, you're good.
Okay. Do you want it louder back there? Okay. Well, Carolyn has developed a powerful speaking voice, so I won't turn it up too loud. So, how about this? Is that a little better back there, Kathy? Better? Okay. So, hey folks, my name's Michael Gaskill. I am one of the field organizers for the Carolyn Long campaign. I cover Cowlitz County, Lewis County, and for the last couple of weeks also Pacific County. Yeah. Excited? You're excited? Yeah. So, Carolyn will be showing up any minute, and we want to make sure, and because it is not the hour and a half town hall she likes to hold, we're just going to have a town hall for an hour. I'm going to kind of do some housekeeping up front. So, the first thing to know, most important, the bathroom is straight to the back. And if the door is open, then the bathroom is open. Secondly, if folks need to slip out early for any reason, Carolyn will be kind of up here, so the rear door is open. And I also just want to take a minute to, I don't know if either of the owners of Santa Lucia, I don't believe they're here, but I really want to take a moment to appreciate them because they have really been a home for this campaign in Lewis County. And they've been allowing us to hold phone banks here, canvases, in addition to roasting the best coffee in Lewis County. So please make sure and support them. And one way you can do that is by maybe taking a look at some of this amazing artwork that Justin, one of the owners, makes. I wasn't paid for that. So anyways, I know a lot of folks are here for the town hall, and that's great. Carolyn is really committed to being the most accountable representative that we've had, right? The most present and accountable representative that this district has ever had. And so this is exactly how she is going to be as a congresswoman, is present and accountable. And also, I know a lot of you folks know that we are going to be heading out to canvass Centralia or staying here to phone bank afterward. And so for everybody that is already a supporter or maybe has come with questions, and once you hear Carolyn speak, will be a supporter, I encourage you all to stick around after this. We're going to host phone bank and canvas training. Some folks that have been canvassing and phone banking already can, if you haven't already, grab a turf, a walking list, and just kind of head out right after that. What I want to make sure that folks know that are planning to head right out the door and canvas is we want to this is the lit we'll be handing out, and I want to make sure that everybody grabs this and signs out which walk list number. Claire, could you grab that sign out sheet? So for folks that would like to, that haven't canvassed with us before or are here to learn how to phone bank, we'll be doing those trainings. We'll kind of let everything settle down a little bit after the town hall to start the training. If you grabbed a walk list or are going to grab a walk list, this is the sheet that I will ask you to sign your name and number to the corresponding list number. And just so I know, so I know who's out where, just in case we lose somebody. I've also put my name and number on every walk list in case folks have questions, right? And so for folks that are planning on heading straight out to Canvas after this, for our supporters, I just want to point out that our script has changed a little bit because we're in Get Out and Vote, which is awesome. Ballots are out in a lot of places. I actually know some people that have already turned them in, right? So not everybody has their ballots, but a lot of folks do. So just make a note of the script change, and note that we are primarily asking folks if they are planning to support Carolyn. And studies show that the more we talk with folks about their vote plan and help them visualize a specific vote plan, when are they going to turn it in, where are they going to turn it in, and remind them that postage is paid, right? Studies show that every additional question we talk through voters with makes it increasingly more likely that they will turn in their ballot. And door knocking and phone banking are the #1 ways that we actually reach people and have conversations and increase turnout. And we all want to get as close to 100% turnout as possible. And so Carolyn's walking in the door, so I'm going to shut up for now. And welcome our next conference.
But you have made it, so thank you very much. How many are you here for the first time to see me talk? Okay, that's great. Okay, that's very exciting. So I will tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm running, and then I'm going to really just hand it over to you so that you can ask me questions. Usually our town halls have about 90 minutes, but we're short today, so I'll speak more quickly so you can get as many questions as possible. My name's Carolyn Long, and I'm running to be Jamie Herrera Butler. That usually works, and also go Cougs. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in rural communities. I think that's important in a district that has many rural communities. My dad owned a small business, John's Fresh Produce. I worked there from the age of 12. Actually dropped out of 7th grade because I had to help open the store. So I was a dropout for a bit. It was a great experience for me though as a child because I learned how to work hard. I learned how to support my family, and I also learned the importance of community. Because when you have a small business in a town of about 3,000 people, you really know that the community is the lifeblood of small businesses because their support keeps your doors open. My dad also told me repeatedly that he was teaching me a trade. I thought he was full of baloney because I was going to go to college. I ended up going to college but had to pay for it and ended up working at Safeway in their produce department. So he did give me a trade, thank you Dad. But I also learned the importance of unions because my dad paid me $5 a day and my union paid me a living wage job. So I was a journeyman, local 555 UCW, by the age of 22. And that was very important because I was able to graduate from college relatively debt-free, my undergraduate degree. Went to graduate school in New Jersey to study political science. Came home every summer because, do you know what New Jersey's like in the summer? Neither do I, because I was never there, because I suspected what it was like. Then started to work at Washington State University, Vancouver, where I've taught for 23 years in their political science department. Mostly I I teach political institutions, public policy, and most recently civility and politics, which we really need. I've actually had some success at working on the local level and bringing civility back to politics. 4 years ago, in response to what I was seeing in my local community in Clark County, I started the Initiative for Public Deliberation, where my students are trained as neutral facilitators. We go into the community, we put people around a small table, people of very different backgrounds, and we teach them how to have good conversations by focusing on shared values and beliefs. It's also why I know that there's so much more that unites us as Americans if we focus on those shared values and beliefs, like belief in the democratic process, belief in liberty, things like that. But too often, we're so polarized. It's one of the reasons why I got in this race. I've seen our democratic institutions fraying from the inside. I've seen hyper-partisanship, as you've seen. I see political parties demonizing people from the opposite political party, and it hurts my small d Democratic heart as well as my big D Democratic heart. That and the election of a president who seems to just exemplify incivility to his core sort of pushed me over the edge to have me start thinking about what I could do to fix the system. And so in November, we launched our campaign, and we're doing really well. We feel very good about it. But it is a very conservative district, and so we have a lot of hard work to go over these next 17 days. So I think town halls are incredibly important. This is my 44th town hall in front of now 34 It's fun because I get out of the office and get to meet you and hear your stories, but also answer your questions. It's why we intentionally did this since starting the campaign. It's also important because we're not going to agree on everything. There's only one person that agrees with me 100%, and it's me. And I voted for myself in August for the first time. So the reason why I mention that is because when I disagree with you, or you disagree with me, we should have an exchange about it. I should look you in the eye and tell you why I voted the way I did, and not do it to persuade you that I'm right, but to explain myself. It is something we should expect from every elected official, not just challengers. And as you know, my opponent doesn't hold live town halls. She doesn't think it's necessary, and I think that's a problem because you need to be able to be in connection with your constituents. She also won't debate me, which is infuriating. I want to debate so that I can challenge her on her facts, which she's been very misleading. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you could introduce yourself and then tell us where you're from and then ask a question or make a comment, that's what I would appreciate. I think we only have one mic, so I'll probably have to restate the question if you have a soft voice. But use your indoor voice if not. Who's first? Sir.
Hi, I'm Tom Hess from Olympia. What's the tally on the newspaper endorsement so far?
3 for 3, Carolyn Long. Yeah. And Tom, I'm most happy with the Columbian endorsement. Because as you know, it's the largest newspaper in the district, but they had previously endorsed her in the 3 earlier election cycles.
Wow.
And so they switched their endorsement, and they were very positive. I think they said superior candidate. Yeah. But what I really liked about their endorsement is they said where others, I don't know how they teed it up, but where others see obstacles, Carolyn Long sees problems that she can solve. And I liked that because it was sort of forward thinking and captures my approach, which is as a problem solver, not as an ideologue, not as somebody who's always going to be with the Democratic Party, but if I see a problem, I want to fix it. And so that was good. Yeah, and then I don't know if other newspapers are endorsing. I think that's it. So I think I'm going 3 for 3. Yes.
Billy Joe Rader from Chehalis.
Thanks, Billy. Billy Joe. Thanks for coming.
And I'm glad you said you support unions
Oh, absolutely.
and small business.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it was really important for me. And I didn't know it at the time. You start a new job. This is my first one outside of my dad's business. And I knew that they were, that I was paying a fee, but I didn't know the importance of healthcare and sort of potential retirement benefits. But what I did know, and it's something I think unions have to go back to, is I did have a feeling of solidarity with my coworkers. That I had sort of a second family within the union looking out for me.
Well,
And I think we have to go back to that, don't you?
well, yeah, because we got to protect our interest in working in some place and not getting laid off for some stupid reason that they can't account for.
Right. And Billy Joe, knowing that they have your back, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so I agree, certainly.
I could just follow up on that, Dave Swan from Centralia.
I did.
What would you do, what would you target in order to support you?
Yeah, it's a great question because most of the work that's done is at the state level. So in Washington State, we have a very labor-friendly state, and it's only still 12% in terms of what we have. But we have ways to protect collective bargaining at the state level. We need to do that at the federal level. So part of it is taking some of our effective state measures and federalizing it so that you don't have this patchwork approach to labor support depending upon the state you live in. So, if you're in Scott Walker's state, you can see how badly he's eviscerated the unions. So you have to do it at the federal level. I'd also like to see the Janus decision undone. The Supreme Court ruled about public unions that you essentially don't have to pay the fee. And I think that's unfortunate, and that's gonna be tough to undo, but there's gotta be a way we can get around to that. What I wanna do though is strengthen not only collective bargaining, but making it easier for people to unionize. Because that's part of the challenge, is being able to get together, and there are barriers to that. So I'd like to federalize that approach. And I would say that the Washington congressional delegation, the Democrats, are very good union champions, and so if we could talk about our experience in Washington State, especially if we pick up all these seats, then we can have a good story to tell, because we can point to our living wage jobs that we provide.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Abby Resky from Olympia.
Abby?
Abby, yeah. Excuse me, got a frog, just as I was saying my name. Thank you for stepping in and for your intelligent, bold campaign. My question is, where do you stand on 1631, and also, what do you think of the leading issues in education today?
Yeah, so for 1631, we're still doing a little bit more research on it. I'm very close. We're doing another roundtable. I had earlier said that I was supportive of it and its approach because it was very collaborative. There were some unions that were on board in terms of crafting the measure. But then I later learned that the building trades, who've been very supportive of me and certainly who have thoughts on this, were not at the table. And so I've got another roundtable that I'm doing, I don't know, some before at the election, I think in a week, just to hear them out and to hear others out to make sure that it is collaborative as I thought it was.
Okay.
I definitely think we have to deal with the emissions issue. I certainly like that measure better than one we had, I think, 2 or 3 years ago that was done by initiative. But I want to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. I definitely think we have to do something in terms of the environment, and not just focus on emissions, but focus on sustainable forestry practices, because we know that we can sequester carbon with the trees. Something that's coming out of Washington State University right now is research on burying carbon as a way to address that issue. So I think that there are many ways to do it. The best thing that we could do, however, is to bring clean energy projects to our communities. And we've had success in the Puget Sound area. We need to bring it down to the 3rd Congressional District. Because what happens now is in communities that are struggling to bring family wage jobs, they're often targeted by the fossil fuel industry because they know we want those jobs. And so if they are based on fossil fuels, we're also contributing to the problem. So we want to do that as well. So if we can just get a little love down our way, we won't be talking about coal and gas and things like that. And so the second question was education? K-12 or higher, or both? Yeah, so for K-12 education, obviously those are local decisions, but what we know nationally is that there are many schools that are struggling for funds, particularly in the rural areas. So as your federal representative, my responsibility is to make sure federal funds are available to prop up those schools because they don't have, secure tax bases. And having grown up in a rural community, I know this firsthand. My buddy Steve Leake, I went to high school with. Hi, Steve. He and I went to Brookings Harbor. I think there was a town, I graduated class 87, I think. I think it was 87, and I think only 7 of us went to college. And we had a decent education, but not nearly the education we could have because the funding was so terrible. And they closed our school down 7 weeks early once. And so we suffered from that, even though we both, graduated from college and we're doing fine. So I know firsthand what it's like and that it's a problem. And in terms of higher education, again, the role I see in the federal government is in regards to funding things like Pell Grants, making sure they're fully funded. If people have to resort to loans, making sure those are very low interest or no interest loans. I'm still paying off my student loan for graduate school, which is ridiculous. I'll have it paid off by the time my daughter's ready to go to school. That's not right. So she's going to pay for her own way, I'll tell you that. The other thing is that there are some loan forgiveness programs right now that are under attack by the Trump administration. And loan forgiveness programs are very important because they encourage people to go into certain jobs where it's hard to attract jobs, especially if you've got a heavy debt. And so I want to make sure we expand that. The other thing I think it's important to talk about is the fact that higher education isn't for everyone, And so I very much believe we have to focus on apprenticeships and internships early, even as early as middle school and also high school, so that we know, we let our youngsters, 2/3 of whom don't go on to college or university, that there are different career pathways. And I'm very much in favor of what are called registered apprenticeships, which are apprenticeships through unions, because you can earn while you learn, which is fantastic, so you don't again have that debt. And then also providing funding for more skills centers. And for all of that, I want to make sure that we look at how our economy is evolving, and look at the jobs that aren't going to be automated, and make sure we're getting people into those types of jobs. Because automation, more than anything else, is creating these loss of jobs. And so we have to be forward thinking on that matter. Thanks for your question, though.
Thank you.
Sir.
I'm sure you'll be, as a congresswoman, my name is Anil Puri, I live in Centralia. We're dealing with approving of the budget for the federal government.
Yeah.
And last year, fiscal year ending in September 30th, deficit was close to $800 billion.
Yeah.
And then total is $21, $22 trillion. And not a day goes by that I don't think about that.
Yeah.
Is the servicing of the debt with the rising interest rate. So I'm sure you have thought about that for sure.
Yeah, so let me actually, before I get to the spending bill, parts of which were terribly problematic, increasing defense spending when they weren't even asking for it. I mean, there are plenty of things that I would not have favored that the Republicans pushed through. And it obviously does contribute to the deficit and then the more formal debt. The bigger issue, I think, is the tax bill, to be honest with you. Because the tax bill, which gave 82% of the benefits to corporations, which are permanent, and then to the wealthiest Americans, which aren't permanent, but they're going to have a nice tax break for 10 years, contributed heavily to our deficit and debt. And so what we're doing is we're actually borrowing from future generations, including my daughter, to pay for tax breaks to people who are already doing well in this economy. So I think that tax bill is the main reason why, I haven't done the numbers, but the main contributor to the debt and our annual deficits, which is going to continue on. I mean, we're looking at probably $1 trillion a year that's going to be tagged on to that. And that's problematic because it's fiscally irresponsible, and it's also not helping the people who need it the most, which are working families and small businesses. There's also something weird happening where we're giving big corporations these tax breaks, and we're giving small businesses minor tax breaks. So those minor businesses are going to be in trouble as the corporations increase in their power. So we have to sort of think about what are some unintended consequences. So revisiting the tax bill is something that I would very much like to do. And to stop playing politics with it. The Republicans in the House passed a bill out of committee to make the individual tax cuts permanent. And they did that knowing that it's never going to actually fly. So they're playing politics with it. We got to call attention to. But I think it's money in and it's money out. So we have to, simple arithmetic. We have to continue to have a booming economy, but make sure it's a booming economy that helps working class families, make sure tax cuts reflect that, and make sure we support small businesses. But yeah, I don't know what committee I'm going to be on, but one that involves budgets would be fascinating to me. Thank you, it's a good question. Yes, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Lynn Treat. I'm from Chehalis, and I'm concerned, this is kind of like a corollary to what you just said about the tax reform, and that is our loss potentially of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah, Lynn, I agree with you. Lynn, the question was about how the tax bill sets up a conversation about cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And Lynn, you're absolutely right, and I forgot to mention it because I got lost.
That's okay, that's why I asked you.
Thank you. Mitch McConnell dropped the ball the other day, and he revealed what we knew to be the case, which is that he's saying that because of the deficit and the debt that we have to start cutting programs. And he specifically said Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And we've always known that this is something Paul Ryan wanted to do. That was part of those initial conversations that he had when he was trying to tackle spending and how we repackage some of these in terms of how we fund them. So I think we have to focus on that, in this, not only in this campaign, but also in talking to people about these programs and about what we see as a strategic move by the Republicans to pass a bill that helps those who are already doing well as a way to set up a conversation about cuts. And then I would ask everyone, both in this room, and ask you to ask your friends and neighbors, who do you trust on protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? Because if history shows anything, it's the Democratic Party. And I've said in the voting pamphlet, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, non-negotiable.
Right.
And we have to look at ways to make it more solvent, and it's not about increasing your age, it's about increasing the cap on where we get the funds for Social Security. So remember, who do you trust on this? It's Democrats. And then when I heard my opponent talk about how I was threatening Medicare, I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, do your research, because I know from what we just heard what the Republicans are planning. So thank you, Lynn, for bringing that up.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
You're done? No.
I'm Catherine Ford from Centralia. And I just wondered how you plan, what your strategy is if the House is Democratic and the Senate remains Republican.
So Catherine asked what would happen, what's the strategy if the House is Democratic and the Senate is Republican. It's just going to be a hard 2 years, is what I'm going to say. My approach is going to be the same. One of the things that I want to happen, which is not happening in Congress right now, is for Congress to reclaim its role in governing and in sort of making law. The framers made Congress the most important branch of government. That's why it's Article 1 of the Constitution, because they wanted the laws to actually come from Congress, not the executive branch. And we see a continual shift of power to the executive branch because Congress has been ineffectual. Part of it's because of polarization, but the other part is because the Republican leadership will not let bills out of committee onto the floor for a vote if they don't know that Trump is going to sign it. They only want to throw out bills where Trump's going to sign it, which is not very responsible, because they should get the bills out to show the public that this is what they're doing in terms of governing, and if Trump doesn't like it, he can sign it or not. I don't really care. I mean, I care, but we will have done our job. So in the House, I think our job has to be to continue with our lawmaking function, to get bills on the floor for a vote, to show the American people what Democrats are doing for the American people. I also think that the Senate's going to be close. So if there's a chance that we have a little bit of change, then it's going to be able to go to those senators who really want to work to govern and to show them that we're willing to do so. But we have to do our job within our own chamber, persuade the other chamber to do its job, and then leave it up to the Republican president to do what he does. But we have to reclaim our constitutional authority as lawmakers. I'm happy to lead that effort.
Hi, my name's Peggy. I'm from Olympia. I feel like we're in a boat with a million holes, and to pick one issue is really hard right now. But for me, it's climate change.
Yeah.
But in order to deal with climate change, we have to have the people that will vote for making those changes.
Yeah.
And so it brings us back to getting money out of our elections, having reinstituting the Voter Rights Act, getting rid of voter suppression, and I would love to see something that requires politicians to be truthful in their ads. We've had so much lately. We had a deceptive mailer in Thurston County that's just outrageous, and there ought to be, and even if it goes to the PDC, it'll probably be after the election. They know that, so it's just the price of doing business. I would like to see something that we can do that stops those things in their tracks.
Yeah, I agree. Betty?
Peggy.
Peggy.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about climate just at the very end, but you know what you've identified is something we need to talk about as Americans, which is the things that are threatening our democratic institutions. So the first, of course, is Russia, and the meddling in our elections in 2016, and the fact that it's happening now, and the fact that this president doesn't seem to recognize it, and the fact that we have to make sure that there are sanctions that are implemented forcefully, because it's only going to continue to happen. But there are other institutional problems around voting. So we find out in Georgia that the Secretary of State, who is over elections, who's running for governor, has led to a purge of, I think, 53,000 individuals. we found out that a state Supreme Court in South Dakota,
North
Dakota, sorry, had a ruling down which would systematically disenfranchise Native people because it required a physical address. Although I found out that they're getting around that by creating their own physical addresses because they could do that as a sovereign nation. So good for them. It shouldn't have had to happen, but I heard the fact that they had a solution right away made me very excited. So voter suppression is an issue. That's why so many Democratic governors need to be elected, and we're seeing some potential there. Money in politics, obviously a huge problem. I don't take corporate money. I never will. My opponent does, and she's proud of it, and her voting reflects that she's influenced by it. She took $56,000 in corporate money from pharmaceutical companies, voted to give them a $42 billion tax cut. I don't see why we're not calling more attention to that in a democratic world. But to get big money out of politics is difficult, but if we elect people who have the same philosophy of not taking that corporate money, and we are elected, maybe we can get some federal legislation that at least does something. I really believe that transparency in politics is important, and if we can't get corporate money out, we can at least create transparency by making requirements of who exactly are paying for these ads. And then one of the reasons why I'm so supportive of the press, which everybody should be unless you're Donald Trump, who likes body slamming members of Congress who attack the press, is I think we have to ask the press to help us, help the people learn about what facts, what are misleading facts. So we have to do something more effectively through the press, if we can't do it ourselves. So that was a lot there. Climate change, obviously a big issue. And we talked a little bit about getting the fossil fuel industry, minimizing its role, but we have to continue to take every effort possible. In Congress, I'm encouraged by something called the Climate Solutions Caucus, where a Democrat joins the caucus and brings a Republican, so it's bipartisan, to talk about climate. I think that's a good starting point so that we're not sort of, Republicans are in one camp and Democrats are in another. Thank you. Great question. Thank you. Yes?
What is your position?
Who are you? I'm sorry,
Oh,
I've never
sorry.
met you before.
Susan from Alaska.
I love on Alaska, by the way. It's an inside joke.
Anyway, I think it's 1634 is that the food and beverage tax initiative?
Yes. Yeah, so I just did, it's so funny, I've been running so hard, people are asking about these initiatives, and I'm like, I gotta read up on it. So my take on it, and again, I'm not having a round table, but my understanding is that is a statewide initiative which would not allow localities to institute taxes. And that goes against my philosophy of local control. And oftentimes Republicans talk about local control, but Democrats are now talking about local control. And I believe that it's very important, particularly in the 3rd district, because there are a lot of communities that have, they don't have really good tax bases. And so if this is one avenue that they want to use in order to help fund, schools or fund sewer services and all of that, they should do it. So, but that's my initial thought. Again, I want to read it a little bit more fully, but I don't like the idea that you take it out of the hands of a community, take decisions out of the hands of the community. I also believe, and I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the measure is being very much supported by big dollar interests. And so it actually shows one of the problems with initiative or referendum, which is this is less and less as time goes on about the people having a say, and more about big money having a say. They've really adulterated the process. In the back? Yes.
Well, I'm Sam from Morton.
Hey, Sam.
And after we help you win and you go back to Washington, D.C., tell us a little bit about how your staff, about how many people you have on your staff, what will they be doing, and how will they interact with us back here in our district?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't fully know the answer. I have a budget for staff, and I think that we usually have 7 or 8 in DC. There'll be somebody who does communications, somebody who's the chief of staff, several who do policy, and some who do constituent services. And it's probably even more, but I don't know, because I want to wait till I win. I don't want to, what do you call it, jinx my chances. But I also know that you have to have staff at home, and that's very important, and I have thought a lot about that. Because you want to make sure you've got somebody here representing me in the district. So I don't know how many that will be, but I know that I want to have as many people as possible in as many spots as possible. So we'll probably have an office in Vancouver because that's where most of the voters are in Clark County. But we will also either have an office or office hours in Longview, Kelso area, or somewhere up here, somewhere where it's within a half an hour drive of constituents. The other thing that I thought a lot about is having somebody who is either holding office hours or maybe permanently at a VA center. Because one of the things that concerns me about veteran services is whether or not they have access to members of Congress to make sure that their needs are heard. So we're trying to figure out the best way to do that, and it may have to be a full-time person, but that's something I'm exploring as well. Do you have suggestions?
Yeah, I thought you said that when you came to the Veterans Museum too, and I thought that was really a good idea that you would have someone the veterans could talk to that would know a whole lot about Veterans Affairs and would be communicating directly with you. You could also have someone like that having to do with environmental issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's so important is to hire good staff who I know will represent me. Because I've heard that my opponent, when people call her and ask questions about issues, sometimes the staff doesn't know what her position is, and so they're left concerned that they don't know where she stands. I want to make sure I have staff who are as outspoken as I am, who will tell you what my positions are, because that's what constituents want to hear. Now, sometimes, like I said, with 1631 and even the whatever the number is on the food and beverage one, I'm still working, I'm still thinking about it. But being able to tell people where you stand is very important. But I have a disabled vet on my team, and so I know how important these issues are. And something I learned, and I don't know if I said this when we saw each other last, is that it's very difficult sometimes for veterans to seek out help. That they're reluctant to do so because they think that they're taking the spot of someone else. So I think we have to make it as easy as possible for them to get services. And somebody had a great idea, and I don't know if it's possible or not, but she said we should have a hotline, sort of like a 911, I don't know what the numbers would be, where if somebody had a question, it would be a 3 number, that you dial up and you ask your questions and they make sure you get help. We have to protect our men and women who have served, and the best way to do that is provide as much service as possible. So I am thinking about the ways to do that.
Just a comment on this is Lynn Treat.
Lynn from Centralia.
I was thinking about this connection with the veterans, and the thing that is misleading with Jamie is that she says she's has the voice that speaks for veterans. She brags about it, and yet I don't see that kind of follow through happening.
Yeah. So Lynn was talking about lack of follow through with her office. Yeah, I don't know. I do know she does say she speaks for veterans. There's a lot of photos showing her with veterans. I do know that I'm very much committed, just because of the people who I have in my family and around me, to those services. And one of the things that I've talked about is, not privatizing the VA, because there's an effort to do so, and not trying to do it unintentionally through some of the veteran support services that we're providing. The Choice Act is fantastic for veterans, but it's also seen as a way to undermine the VA and to privatize it eventually. So that these are the things that I think about and ways in which I can help champion those issues. Thank you, Lynn. Yes.
My name's Naki from Olympia.
Naki?
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you. And to me, one of the most appalling things that has happened has been the separation of children from their parents, their families at the border. And it's just viscerally upsetting. Not over it. What can you share with us about your perspective on immigration, on asylum seekers, and what you make it to Congress, what what kind of leadership you will show on that, horrible situation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Nagi, and it's one I get a lot, especially when it first started happening. So let me first talk about the political refugee crisis, because that is separate from immigration. My opponent doesn't think so, but these are men and women who are fleeing chaos in their countries, and they're afraid for their lives, and that's why they're taking such a treacherous trek to the United States. And previously, our asylum system worked really well. The people who came in got into a queue. They would get before an administrative law judge. 99% of them showed up to their hearing. And then this thing happened a couple of months ago where the Trump administration started doing the separation as a way to leverage money for a border wall, in my opinion. He was doing it to sort of say, this is how we have to treat people, and by the way, I want a wall, because he's trying to cut a deal. And that's also with Dreamers, which I'll talk about in a second. So we're making some efforts now on family reunification. It seems to go day by day that things change. Judges have said we're not moving fast enough. We've learned more children were separated than we initially realized. We've learned also that the process is so manipulative that parents are being told that if they don't sign paperwork, they're never going to see their kid again, but that paperwork also says that they're never coming back. And so first is severe congressional oversight over what happened, to find out all the details, because I think there are holes, and then to find a bipartisan solution so that it doesn't happen again. And the reality is there are Republicans who also agree that this process is bad. And then they see it being exploited by this president. So I think we can get certitude on that, especially if the Democrats take back the House. Because we can lead that conversation. And it was heartbreaking. And let me just say that we came out very early with postings about how egregious this was, postings to the video. Jamie and her brother waited 10 days for until making a comment. And her comment was, parents shouldn't be separated from their kids. And that was it. And it was just odd for me to, as somebody who's a parent, to hear another parent just come out with that rather than really chastising the president. Another area connected to immigration is the DREAM Act. There's overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress among the electorate for a clean dream bill. It won't be out of Congress, out of committee, because the leadership won't do it. But I think we could do that to honor the promise that we made them under the Obama administration. So I think that can happen. And I also think there's bipartisan support for a more enhanced guest worker program, because we need these workers in some of our industries. Then it gets a little tricky, because all Trump wants is the wall, and he's holding these other things hostage, as are the Republicans, because of the wall. I'm very much against that as an infrastructure project. I think we could have enhanced border security that isn't a wall. We could do it remotely. We can have other areas of enhanced security, absent a wall, in areas where people cross, and it's not going to cost that much money. When I want infrastructure, I want roads, I want bridges, things that actually will improve our infrastructure and help the movement of people and commerce. I also think that a wall does not fix the problem. 50% of our people who are staying here are overstaying their visas, and they are flying into America. So I don't know how big his wall intends to be. It's not 30,000 feet high. So I really want a solution that will actually address that problem. What I will do is agree to funding for enhanced border security if it includes a pathway to citizenship. Not the trillions of dollars that he wants, but I do think there has to be some sort of a path to citizenship. So that might be one of those votes that you take where you're given a little bit to get a little bit. But on the things where there's overwhelming bipartisan support, we can do that cleanly, and I don't think we should look for comprehensive reform. We have to get some wins early on to show the people, and to show the people in our communities that we care about them and we're looking out for them, and that we can get something done so they're not living in fear. Thank you. Sir.
Hi, Mike, I'm from Napavine. Lewis County and some of your other areas is very rural, and guns are a part of that culture. How do you plan to balance, that part of the culture and still, keeping guns away from psychos, which I think we all agree is a good idea.
It's Mike, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to say for all Democrats, we're not trying to take your guns away. That's been the message that the NRA has consistently, shared, and it's not true. I believe in the Second Amendment, but like all amendments, and I'm a constitutional law professor, you have exceptions to those amendments. None of them are unlimited or absolute, and it's startling that that's where the conversation, has headed. That's where the conversation is. I do believe. I'll give you just several things. I believe that our gun safety measures should be dictated by science. So I'm very pleased that the Centers for Disease Control now is able to study gun violence. There was a legislative prohibition against it. It was lifted last session, but it hasn't been funded. So I want to make sure we fund the CDC so they can study gun violence, so we can craft policy measures that are in reaction to that. The second thing I would mention is that there is bipartisan agreement on many gun safety measures that we just don't talk about. Enhanced universal background checks, making sure we provide funding so it can happen. It's not a burden on people who have to engage in those checks. Closing the gun show loophole. In Washington State, we had 2 ballot initiatives passed overwhelmingly by the public that deal with extreme risk protection orders and that also deal with people who are adjudicated mentally ill. So if that can happen in Washington State, can we have some version of those measures federally? Because guns, of course, travel, and it seems like there has to be a federal solution. So I would start with those bipartisan measures, but make sure it's always guided by what we know works, what we know is effective. And it's also why we have to not let the NRA really keep control of this conversation, not just through their money, but also through how they message these issues, which is why I'm so proud of the Parkland kids. So these are the kids who had a tragedy in their high school, and they're going out into communities and recruiting youngsters to talk about gun safety in a real rational, non-emotional way. And they are doing it better than adults, so I think we have to learn from them. But I do believe in the Second Amendment, and I know that it is important in rural communities. It was important in my hometown because many people were hunting, but a lot of these gun safety measures aren't going to not allow people to use the weapons in the way they've been using it historically. Thanks, good, Mike, good question. In the back, and then, yeah.
Rachel from Olympia. And how much of an opioid crisis is there in the 3rd District and what can be done at the federal?
Great question. The question was about the opioid crisis. So it's a significant problem. In Cowlitz County, I think opioid deaths were one of the highest in Washington State. And meth continues to be a problem, particularly in rural communities. I'm glad you mentioned it, because so often we focus on opioids and we don't focus on meth, which has been a continual problem. We also see it disproportionately in the rural communities. So how are we going to combat it? I was pleased that Congress has more funding now to help tackle the opioid crisis. But it's not just about money, it's about how do we treat people who are suffering from addiction, and how do we treat them humanely, including treating them with some substances in order to help get them off of drugs. And it's also about making sure that we create opportunities for people in our communities so they aren't attracted to drugs. You know, it's not just say no, it's why are people going to opioids? And there are so many answers. One is the loss of hope. People don't see a pathway for themselves and their family. Another thing is the role of big pharma in frankly overprescribing these drugs, which is why I'm so proud of Bob Ferguson as one of the many attorney generals who are trying to challenge big pharma. And the other is the lack of real good requirements about or guidelines about who can get these opioids. We're tightening it up now, but we have to do more. So federal funding for substance treatment, federal funding to make sure we are able to deal with people humanely is very important first step. So, and just to answer your question initially, it is a big problem. And it's getting worse in some communities, which is regrettable. And part of it is that there aren't treatment centers that are within driving distance, short drives for many people. So we have to make sure that we have more clinics that are doing that. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, Sonny Hagee from Centralia, two-part situation here. Number one, I'm a lifetime hunter. Mm-hmm. I've never had to have an AK-47 to knock something down. I think a little bit of education and common sense would help the gun measures. The other thing, we look and Congress, and it's an old boys. Yeah. Sorry, an old boys school. Yeah. How do you feel about maybe going along with Pal and let's reduce these times that we can serve to get the job done right? And when we keep the president 4 years a term, but some of these people go, I can't even force my name to say Mitch McConnell, he's already screwed up all three branches of the government. Yeah. So, you know, we need to, I think we need something pulled back. You know, we need to serve X number of years and bye.
Yeah, so I remember Sonny. I don't know if you remember me, Sonny, but we met in PL.
Yeah, yes, we did.
We did, and you introduced yourself to me because you newly moved to Washington, and had said that you had not really been involved in politics before. You'd obviously voted for years, but you'd come out and times are so dire. You're getting involved in politics. So thank you very much, and thank you for being involved in my particular campaign. Yes, I think that most hunters would agree with you that they don't need an AK-47, and thank you for being such a good shot. Term limits are a tough one. So I've got a two-part answer to this, and it's coming up increasingly because people have been in for a long time, and then I'll throw some shade on Mitch McConnell just for fun. The problem with term limits that we've seen at states who have instituted term limits is what happens is because you have a lot of newly elected members to the state legislature, the power actually shifts to staff and to lobbyists who are unaccountable to the people. So that concerns me because I already see how much power lobbyists have, in Congress, and I wouldn't want them to have too much power because oftentimes they're supporting corporate interests. But I do think that the problem with people staying in for a long time is more institutional. So those things we can change. So two answers there. The first is redistricting. One of the things that we've had happen, because the Republicans have been so good at capturing state legislative houses, is that they have been in control of redistricting. And so they are creating congressional districts that favor their party. And if they're not successful in doing that, what they do is they create safe Republican districts and safe Democratic districts. And we've done that in Washington State. So my good friend Denny Heck has a very safe district now, and his not friend Jamie Herrera Butler had a very safe district. That's why it's so hard for me to win, because it very much is conservative leaning. So we want to make sure that when redistricting happens, it happens more appropriately, and so you're not advantaging individuals or parties. And the Supreme Court has made that hard because of the ruling that they did, which wasn't a win. So let's focus on redistricting, because what's happening in very safe districts is people who are more extreme than their predecessor are replacing them. So that's leading to polarization, because if you're in a safe Republican district and you retire, the primary battle is the real battle, and the more extreme person is going to win. So that's another reason why we have to get rid of it. The second institutional problem is money in politics. It really is. Because you have a situation where people have been there for a long time, have their pockets being lined with corporate interests, and that allows them to scare off people, including challengers within their own party. And so once we can diminish the role of money in politics, we're going to have more competitive elections. So if we have more competitive elections, hopefully we will have term limits called elections. The third thing is that we have to expand the electorate. This is so important, which is why democracy and all these things, the voter suppression is such a problem for us. Right now, the extreme right and some of the extreme left have an outsized voice in our democracy. They really do. They're the ones who are speaking the loudest, and it's because they have the megaphone, they use social media, and they control the conversation. If we expand the electorate by having more people register to vote, by keeping more people involved, by having more voices in the room, you're going to have more opportunity to change who are elected to Congress. So if we can work on those three institutional issues, I think that's going to give us the term limits that we need. Mitch McConnell. I don't know why he blew it the other day, so he must be losing it. He's been in there for far too long. He's very proud of his obstructionist tactics that he's used for years. He's the one who said early on we were going to make Barack Obama a one-term president. He's in charge of this assault on the Affordable Care Act for the last 8 years. And now, through his manipulation of Senate rules, he's got 2 Supreme Court justices that he wants. That should not happen in America at all. And I think the price that is paid is one paid by all of us, because he is giving us less faith faith in our democratic institutions, because we're seeing how you can manipulate those democratic institutions if you have so much power. So everybody's talking about Susan Collins and how they want to get her out. I think we got to start raising money for eventually who's going to take out Mitch McConnell, because he's done so much bad for our institutions and our democracy. I think we have to talk about it in exactly that way. So I agree with you, Sandra. Yes.
And your name? My name is Kelly, and I'm from Centralia. And I'm thinking about, you have a lot of good ideas that I love hearing. You will be serving but during a presidency that creates chaos.
Yeah.
Creates crises that have to be addressed, whether it's kids in cages or supporting sexual assault or other kinds of just outrageous things. So a lot of your term will be spent reacting to the latest crisis.
Yeah.
And we want you to go fight for us. We want you to do that. But what's the one issue that even with all of that you're reacting to, you will not move off the table, that you're going to be focused on achieving in a proactive way?
I'm going to give you two. One is healthcare, because it matters so much to me, because I see how the Trump administration has eviscerated the ACA, got rid of the individual mandate, won't fight for it in court, which means people with pre-existing conditions are going to be at risk. And it's coverage that has helped millions of Americans and saved lives. So the reason I started there is because Patty Murray is got bipartisan support in the Senate for measures to help the ACA. That's something that I'm going to get in the House, and I think that's doable. But the second thing is Social Security and Medicare. I mean, the reality is, it's going to be out on the chopping block because Republicans now are considering themselves fiscally responsible once again. And I love being now the party of fiscal responsibility, which I think we always have been, frankly. Democrats run more surpluses, our deficits are lower, we have to remind people of that. But the reason why that's so important is, like health care, those are programs that help the people who are most vulnerable in our communities. So if you talk about people who are on Social Security, half of them, that's their only source of revenue. If we're living in an economy where we hear it's going well, but people are paying more for prescription drugs, they're paying more for consumer goods, they're paying more for housing, that check gets smaller and smaller. So I think that as Americans, we have a responsibility to help the people who are most vulnerable. Same thing with Medicare. Medicare provides services for our seniors, and we want to make sure those services are available and that they are affordable for them. And so those would be the two major issues, is protecting our most vulnerable through, well, let me say that, protecting the most vulnerable will be the issue by providing access to affordable health care, by protecting the programs that are at risk of being cut that provide those services. Good, I packaged it into one issue. Three parts to it.
My question is about, we live in a rural area. I'm from Centralia. My name is Kathy Kathis, and I'd like to know how you might think about helping us with our internet access.
Oh, yes. I think you asked me that the first time I met you, Kathy. So I apparently haven't sold you on my answer. So one of the things I'm not talking about enough, just because I answer questions, so sometimes we don't cover it organically. But one of the things I talked about a lot early on is investment in infrastructure. And I mentioned earlier that's roads and bridges, but it's also broadband internet. And in the rural communities, you are very much disadvantaged by not having that basic infrastructure, it's not a project, amenity. The reason why it's important is not so you can get to your Netflix, but it's important because it connects you to educational opportunities. If you've got small businesses, it connects you to potential consumers out of your area. And so it's incredibly important that we provide that. I care about net neutrality, but in communities like this, it's about just net, making sure you have it. So my understanding was that Washington State tried to pass a bill in the last session to provide funding for broadband internet, and it wasn't successful. I think this is an obligation of the federal government. And I look at the internet the same way we looked at the federal highway system under the Eisenhower administration, is that it is a key element that we need in order to survive in this economy. And so I will be pursuing as much federal funding as possible. You know, I lived overseas for a bit in a small country where I was teaching, and they had fantastic internet, and I thought, why is it so good? It's a small country, and so for them, the investment, you know, was significant, but not nearly as significant as the United States it is, but it's something where we need to put money, because there's an economic element to it that we have to remember that will help our rural communities, and it should be a bipartisan effort, because it is not connected to political parties. Yeah.
So speaking of internet, you are so good in person, and it's just, people just need to get in front of you.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about live streaming your town halls or doing a town hall online where people could ask questions to get, we know Democrats win when youth vote.
Sure.
To give maybe more youth a chance to interact with you on social media, or give people who may not come to a town hall, like Republicans who may be considering another vote, a chance to get to interact with you, to maybe type out questions or just live stream this. Just, I think if people just see you in person, it is like, oh, this is somebody that I want to represent me and I want to vote for me. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on social media.
I hate looking at myself.
We love looking at you though.
All the rest of us like looking.
I know. It's painful. So we should do it. We haven't. I have one more town hall. What days? So Monday. I have one tomorrow at the university. So let me look at whether we can at least tape one and then put it online. I do know that we did do one on, we haven't put it online, but let me look into that, because I think that you're absolutely right. For people who can't get here, it allows them to see me. Also to hear my positions, which have been wildly mischaracterized by my opponents.
Yes.
So there's now a reason for it, to correct policy. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion. I'll talk to my team about it. Thank you. It's a good one. Sir, and then
my name is Jim from Randall, my wife Leslie. Just a comment to the previous speaker. I participated in a lot of Jamie's telephone town halls, and I felt like I was filtered.
Yeah.
Okay, so be wary of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you do live, you know, people can type in their own questions and things like that. Beware of trolls.
Oh yeah.
Because everything nowadays associated with social media, the founders of that particular technology probably never envisioned what's happening today.
Yeah, no, I agree. The troll issue is, they're not letting me on Facebook anymore because of the troll issue. And also it's the trolls from out of the country issue as well. So it's changing the nature of our conversation, and usually not very positive. So I'll take that into account. I do like the idea of live streaming it though, because you can immediately answer any question. So that's excellent. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Leah from the Toledo area.
And we go skydiving in the middle.
Oh yeah.
After the election, I wanted to do it.
So I am a small organic farmer in that area, and we sell at a number of the markets: Toledo Farmers Market, Chehalis Farmers Market. And we've all mentioned a few times that it's a rural farming community, but my experience is that what I do is not the thing that is supported in this community. That more direct access food and farmers markets in general. The farmers markets here are kind of floundering at this point. And so I would really like to see someone who can start to show the importance of that direct food access, the high quality food, a more sustainable approach to how you work the land, and access for those small farmers like farmers markets, where we can take our produce and our products directly in there and sell to the people who are buying them, and that's a really important exchange that happens there too. And I do find that what seems to be supported more is a more industrial, large-scale, older group of farmers. And so a younger and a different approach to farming is not as supported here, and there's any struggle.
Yeah.
A lot, and I'd like to see that change.
So a couple things. One, my ideas about which committees to be on has changed as I've thought about it, and I've been thinking a lot more about agriculture because of the timber industry, but also there is some agriculture in the district. So if I were to be on that committee, I could be very much a champion. Also personally, my dad had a small organic farm. So we grew raspberries and kiwis initially, and then we grew things for the produce stand. So I know firsthand what it's like to have a small farm and how difficult it is, number one, because your costs are much higher than with agribusiness, but also how much better the produce is as another. So I'm happy to be a champion because I have a personal interest. I think it's important. And I'm starting to hear real innovative things that people are doing. In Klickitat County, I don't know who funded it. It may have been a nonprofit organization, but they had coupons for people to get produce from the farmers markets. And they gave it out, and the physicians did, as like a prescription. So here's a prescription to get vegetables and fruits. And I thought that is a fascinating idea, because fruits and vegetables, particularly organic ones, are costly, and people who aren't of means aren't gonna probably go. But it was just such a wonderful way of messaging from a physician, you need to eat better, and here's a coupon for free food. And so I love that idea. So I want to see how they did it, if it can be replicated, if we can provide federal funding for it, because I think that would also support the farmers markets as well.
Yeah, I think also there's the people with lower incomes, that's really inaccessible.
Absolutely.
And so we have to kind of target our stuff to higher income people, which is not what we want to be doing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think there are many ways that we can skin that cat, and I'll continue to think about it, but definitely a personal interest of mine as well. Thank you. We're here. I feel like that's, yes.
Jan from Centralia. When you win, and I know you will, I'm interested because there are so many very vibrant Democratic women running throughout the United States.
Yes.
And I know they're all so when you win and you go back to DC, how do you envision all of you new women having any kind of a hand in changing Congress or doing things? I mean, I think it must be exciting.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. So yeah, I think I'm one of 307 women running, many of us running for the first time. I think the number is narrowed as some didn't advance in primaries. But I often get the question, what can you do as one person? And I'm like, it's not one. I'm gonna be with dozens of newly elected members. Most of them are gonna be women. And we're going to have a rare opportunity to change the institution from within. Because one thing we know about women, and I think Sunny was referring to this as well, is we're problem solvers. We are natural collaborators. We want to get stuff done. And so we have that opportunity early on to make a change, but we have to do it quickly. And the reason why we have to do it quickly is usually newly elected members sort of are, they're under the vice-like grip of leadership very fast. So what they kind of need is sort of an energetic political science professor who's got some ideas about how I can get them under my grip, but to do it for democracy. So I have been thinking about it. But you know what? I thought at the beginning, I'll be perfect. But there are many women who are saying the same thing. So I may have a second fight on my hands. But it's a good fight to have, because there are people who want to change the institution. That's why they're running. And I think we only get one shot at this. I really do. We'll take care of the Senate next cycle, but I think we have one shot to show not only that we can put a constitutional check on this president, but that we can fix the institution from within. And I look forward to leading that effort.
Jim again from Randall. I agree with almost 100% of your points of view on the issue. My question to you is an observation of support. I look around the room and they're mostly people above 50 years of age, okay, baby boomers. All right, do you have support at the millennials and Gen X's and Gen Y's or whatever else is out there? That Gen Z. But I'm not disparaging anybody in this room for their age. What I'm trying to understand is, the rest of your support.
Sure.
It's obvious that the baby boomers support you and understand what this country needs. But, it's not just us that make up this district.
I agree, Jim. So, most of my supporters are I'm 51, so they're sort of this generation. And the level of support with millennials is not as good as it should be. And I know people are very critical of millennials for that reason. So we're talking people between the age of 18 and 36, I think, it's 34 or 36. But I want us to remember something, which is why they're not active. And as a college professor, I've interacted with students for 23 years. And what I've seen happen and what I know is happening is that they feel disaffected from politics because they don't see a work in democracy. If you're in that age bracket, you've lived through Bush v. Gore, where you had essentially a Supreme Court decide an election. You've lived through 3 elections where the popular vote winner did not win the Electoral College, particularly this last one, 3 million vote difference. And you've lived through the corrosive role of money in politics. So you see people buying elections from outside interests. And so what happens is that millennials will say, it's not working for me. And it's not even about the issues, it's about how they think our democracy is fundamentally broken. So I think we have to understand that. They may be attracted to certain candidates, like Barack Obama. They were attracted to, disproportionately to Bernie Sanders. They're attracted to this Beto O'Rourke guy I keep hearing about. So sometimes if they're just attracted to candidates, then once those candidates are gone, they sort of drop out. But what I do see as potential is having them attracted to issues. And right now the millennials are very concerned about the environment, they're very concerned about gun safety, and they're very concerned about what their economic outlook is gonna be because they can't see themselves having that family wage job or owning a home. So as Democrats, and even as Republicans, we have to try to bring them in the tent by showing them that we have a plan to fix this democracy. So it means campaign finance reform, it means electing the right people, it means making sure our institutions are operating, and when that happens, we're gonna get more of them back. But it's tough, and I was at a town hall yesterday? It doesn't matter. The other day, I was at a town hall, and I had 2 students there. And one was, I think, 19, and the other was probably in the early 20s. And what I said to them was, you have so much potential power that you don't even know about. You have so much power. Because all of these policies that we're talking about, particularly the ones about the deficit and the debt, is going to impact their lives. What we're doing about the environment is going to impact their lives more than, we'll be gone before the planet burns up. So we have to find a way to message to them that if they get involved, they can make a change in policy. And if they see that, if they see they have that agency and that they can have those solutions, then we got them for life. But we've got to start early, and we've got to start teaching civics in schools. It's crowded out of the curriculum. It's terrible. And make no mistake, that was an intentional effort to do that. And so we have to do it early on, and then we have to just, as repetition. And as politicians, we have to also pay attention to the issues like net neutrality, which they are getting mobilized on. So we've got their support disproportionate to my challenger, disproportionate to my, that's funny, my opposition, but we still don't have enough, and so we gotta work hard to get them. Teach ethics, yes, absolutely. And truth and integrity. Time for one more question. It's got to be a good one. Is it a good one?
I hope so.
Everybody's going to be looking at you. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to say Supreme Court and let you take it from there.
Oh. So my field in political science is public law. So I study the court a lot. And teach constitutional law, civil liberties. I'm really scared. So one of the things that I teach historically is what happens when you've got this type of a Supreme Court. It's what we call an activist conservative Supreme Court. And the last time we had a court with this type of a majority was during the Lochner era. The Lochner era was in 1905 to 1937. And what happened is you had progressive state legislatures, you had a fairly progressive federal government doing things to help the environment, to shore up institutions, to protect labor, and the Supreme Court systematically undid a lot of those regulations. Regulations to protect people against child labor, regulations for a minimum wage, for working hours. And that court did it, and it did it for decades, and it was to the great disservice of all Americans. And right now we've got a court that can and will do that. I know we're focusing on the issue of choice, which is an important one, LGBTQ rights, which is also important. But economic issues is where this court is going to really undo the progress that we've had for years. And that's something that should keep everybody awake at night. And make no mistake, our friend Mitch, Sonny, is the one who did it. And I know that, again, people talk about reproductive freedom, something I'm very much in favor of, but it's those economic issues that are problematic. And so we have to just really hope every day that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is healthy. It's a mantra of mine, as well as the other justices on the court, and hope that there will be new opportunities when we have a new president to replace those more conservative members. And it's unfortunate it's gotten so politicized as well, because it's yet another example of Republicans undermining our democratic institutions. And that is bad for all of us. So I could go on, actually, but do another event. I want to thank you for doing this. I have a blast, actually, holding town halls, because I get to hear from you, you get to hear our message, and the fact that you come on a Sunday to do this warms my small d and big D Democratic heart. And it also shows what I think a representative is obligated to do. That's the other thing. This is an obligation. Now, when I'm elected, I'm not going to do them anymore. I'm going to continue to do them because I do think it is that obligation. But I think we ought to hold our feet to the fire. And if some of you are out there canvassing, maybe you can reflect on this experience when you go out there and ask them when the last time was that they saw their member of Congress. Because I think it is impactful because they haven't. And I know I've met 3,400 or so people in these town halls. And it's been the greatest joy to do so because it's a lot of fun. So thank you very much for what you're doing. We're heading up for another event. Things are getting really tight. Please volunteer. If you volunteered already, please continue to do so. We win this election through the Get Out the Vote effort. And I know Michael's going to probably talk to some people who afterwards wants to do this. And all I'll say is I've done my job. So that if we lose this thing, it's your fault. I'm joking. Knock on your doors, make the phone calls, post on social media, get your friends to vote, have respectful civil conversation, and this is how we win this thing. It's because of you. Thank you so much for being here.